My name is Emily Carter. For 22 years, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought it looked like building a home together, raising our son, and choosing the same person every single day, even when it wasn't easy. But that October night taught me something I'll never forget. "Don't wait up for dinner tonight," my husband Daniel said while adjusting his silver cufflinks in the hallway mirror. He said it so casually, like he was reminding me to buy milk or take out the trash. Then he turned, looked me straight in the eyes, and added, "I'm having dinner with another woman, someone who actually makes me feel alive again." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. 22 years of marriage, 2 decades of sacrifices, quiet support, and building a life in these Chicago suburbs. And that was how he ended the day. Not with anger, not with guilt, but with the calm certainty of a man who believed he no longer had to care how his words landed. If you've ever been the one holding everything together while your partner slowly checked out, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, stay with me. Because what happened at midnight that night changed the entire story. I stood at the kitchen counter that evening, slicing green onions for the baked potatoes I always made on weeknights because they were his favorite. Outside, late October rain streaked the windows in cold silver lines. The backyard maple tree bent against the wind, just like it had for so many seasons of our life together. The house smelled warm, rosemary, garlic, and the faint vanilla from the candle I kept on the island. This was the home we built. The one I helped design, the one where I raised our son, Ethan, the one where I learned to be smaller so Daniel could feel bigger. He walked in wearing the navy blazer I'd bought him last Christmas. His cologne, the expensive one he saved for special occasions, drifted through the kitchen before he even spoke. Not the everyday version. This was the seduction version, the performance version. "You're dressed up," I said carefully, my knife still resting on the cutting board. He checked his reflection in the microwave door. "I'm going out with Lauren." Lauren, the 28-year-old marketing consultant at his firm, the one whose name had started appearing in his phone more and more these past months. I felt my heartbeat slow in that strange way shock sometimes brings, like the body refuses to process the pain at full speed. He kept talking about how our marriage had become predictable, how he needed excitement, how he still loved me, but love wasn't enough anymore. He said it all so reasonably, like a man who had already written the ending to our story and was just being honest. I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I simply listened while something deep inside me quietly cracked open and then settled into a new, colder kind of clarity. He picked up his keys, gave me one last indifferent look, and walked out the front door without looking back. The door closed softly behind him, not a slam, just certainty. I stood there for a long time after his BMW disappeared down the wet suburban street. The potatoes burned in the oven. Upstairs, the television in the guest room played an old sitcom to an empty room. For the first time in years, the house felt honest. Hours later, just after midnight, I heard the garage door rumble open. Then came the heavy silence of a man trying not to sound guilty while secretly believing he no longer owed anyone an explanation. I was sitting in the living room with a legal pad on my lap when the front door opened. Daniel stepped inside, still smiling softly at something on his phone, probably a text from Lauren. But the smile vanished the moment he looked up. The lights were all on. Banker boxes lined the hardwood floor. Financial folders, tax records, mortgage statements, and investment summaries stacked neatly. 22 years of shared life reduced to organized evidence. My overnight bag sat by the staircase, and beside me on the couch was my younger brother Marcus. Daniel froze in the doorway exactly as I knew he would. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice cracking for the first time all night. I closed the folder in my lap and looked at him calmly. "This," I said quietly, "is what happens when someone finally stops pretending." That night, as Daniel stood there in the doorway staring at the boxes and the truth he could no longer ignore, my mind drifted back through the years. Not in a rush of anger, but in quiet waves of memory. Because before everything fell apart so publicly, Our marriage had been built on thousands of ordinary days that I once believed were enough. We met when I was 20 years old, fresh out of college with dreams of a career in marketing. Daniel was ambitious, charming, and so sure of the life he wanted to build. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony under the same maple tree that still stands in our backyard. I remember thinking, as I walked down that makeshift aisle, that this was it, the beginning of something solid and lasting. For the first decade, we were partners. I supported him through his first big promotion, staying up late to help him prepare presentations while pregnant with Ethan. I put my own career on hold when Ethan was born because Daniel's job required travel and someone needed to hold down the fort. Just for a few years, we told each other. Those few years turned into 15. I learned every detail of our home. I knew which cabinet door stuck in humid weather. I knew exactly how Daniel liked his coffee. 2 creams, no sugar, and how Ethan's favorite bedtime stories always involved dragons. I packed lunches, attended parent-teacher conferences, managed the bills, and still found time to keep the house feeling like a sanctuary. Daniel would come home tired from work, and I'd have dinner ready, listening as he vented about difficult clients or office politics. I was his safe place, his anchor. If you've ever been the one who quietly kept everything running while your partner chased success, if you've ever traded your own ambitions for the comfort of being needed, you know how easy it is to lose pieces of yourself without even noticing. There were good years, of course. Summers when we'd take Ethan to the lake and Daniel would teach him how to skip stones. Weekends where we'd sit on that old wooden bench he and Ethan built together, drinking lemonade and talking about the future. I still remember the way Daniel used to look at me then, like I was the only person who truly understood him. Those moments kept me going when things got harder. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance shifted. Daniel's successes at work became the center of our world, his promotions, his bonuses, his networking events. My contributions, the emotional labor, the invisible planning that kept our family running smoothly, started to feel expected rather than appreciated. He began coming home later, distracted by his phone. Conversations that once went deep became surface level. "How was your day?" turned into quick updates before he disappeared into his home office. I told myself it was normal. Marriage evolves, people get busy. I convinced myself that being useful was the same as being loved. I stopped talking about going back to work because he'd say things like, "You're so good at this home stuff, Em. Why complicate it?" And I believed him. I made myself smaller so his world could feel bigger. There was one particular morning I keep thinking about. Ethan was 15, already pulling away toward his own teenage world. I had made breakfast as usual. Scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, coffee in that blue ceramic mug Daniel had given me on our 10th anniversary. He took a sip, checked his watch, and said, "You know, sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to have a little more spark in our life." He laughed it off right after, but the words stayed with me like a small crack in the foundation. I didn't confront him then. Instead, I doubled down on being the perfect wife. I redecorated the living room. I planned more date nights. I tried to be exciting while still handling every responsibility that kept our life stable. Looking back now, I see how exhausting it was, constantly performing peace while feeling myself fade. By the time Lauren entered the picture, I had already sensed the distance growing for months. The late nights at work events, the new cologne. The way he'd smile at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. I didn't want to believe it at first. I told myself I was being paranoid, that, after 22 years, we were just in a rut. But that night, when he said he needed excitement with another woman, something finally broke free inside me. Not in loud tears or screaming arguments, but in a calm, terrifying clarity. I realized I had spent years protecting a version of our marriage that only I was still fighting for. As Marcus sat beside me on the couch that midnight, watching Daniel's face shift from confusion to anger, I understood the real truth. I hadn't just been waiting for him to come home. I had been waiting for myself to finally wake up. That midnight confrontation with Daniel was the visible breaking point, but the real shift inside me had started weeks earlier. It began in small, quiet moments when I finally stopped believing the story I had been telling myself for years. That our marriage was just in a temporary rut, that my sacrifices were still valued, and that staying was the noble thing to do. Let me share 2 memories that helped me wake up. The first was that old wooden bench in our backyard. Daniel and Ethan built it together when Ethan was 12. I can still picture them out there on a warm Saturday, tools scattered across the grass, arguing playfully about measurements while I brought them cold lemonade. That bench became a symbol of our family, a little crooked, weathered by seasons, but still standing. On quiet evenings, I would sit there alone, after Daniel had gone to bed, wondering when we stopped sitting on it together. That night, after he left for his dinner with Lauren, I walked out there in the rain and ran my hand over the worn wood. It reminded me that some things only look solid because one person is still holding them up. The second memory was simpler, my blue ceramic mug. Daniel gave it to me on our 10th anniversary with a note that said, "For the woman who makes every morning better." For years, I drank my coffee from it every single day. Somewhere along the way, he stopped noticing whether I was drinking from it or not. He stopped bringing me coffee on weekends. Small things, I know. But those small things add up when you're the only one still pouring. If you've ever caught yourself ignoring the little signs because facing them would mean upending your entire life, if you've ever convinced yourself that being needed was the same as being loved, I see you. Those quiet realizations are where the real power begins. 6 weeks before that October night, I received an email that changed everything. It was from my old mentor, Rebecca, who had reconnected with me on LinkedIn. She had seen my background and forwarded a job opening senior brand director at a respected agency downtown. 6 figures, full benefits, flexible start date. At first, I laughed it off. Me, after 15 years away from corporate life, raising Ethan, managing our home, I felt outdated, invisible, too far behind. But Rebecca wouldn't let it go. We met for coffee one afternoon while Daniel was at a work conference. She looked at me across the table and said, "Emily, you were brilliant before you disappeared into this suburban life. Don't let him convince you that version of you is gone." Her words stayed with me. That same week, I updated my resume in secret. I prepared for the interviews during Ethan's college hours and while Daniel was at the office. I told no one. Not even Marcus at first. I needed to prove to myself that I could still do this before I let the fear talk me out of it. The interviews went better than I expected. They loved my real-world perspective, the emotional intelligence that comes from managing a household, supporting a family, and understanding what actually connects with people. When the official offer came through, I stared at my laptop screen for a long time. This wasn't just a job, it was proof that the woman I used to be hadn't disappeared. She had just been waiting for me to stop asking for permission to exist. Meanwhile, the signs with Daniel kept getting louder. The new cologne, the late nights, the way he would dismiss my attempts at conversation with, "I'm tired, Em." I started noticing patterns I had ignored for too long. Restaurant charges on our shared card that didn't match any dinner we had together. Jewelry purchases that never made it home to me. Weekend team buildings that didn't add up. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I started preparing, quietly, methodically. I reached out to Marcus, my younger brother who's a lawyer, and asked him to review our financial documents under the guise of estate planning. He immediately saw what I was really doing and stepped in to help without judgment. We began organizing everything: accounts, the house title tied to my father's inheritance, retirement funds. All while Daniel continued living as if nothing was wrong. I wasn't planning revenge, I was planning freedom. By the time Daniel walked out that door for dinner with Lauren, I had already accepted the job offer in my heart. I just hadn't told him yet. That calm I felt as I sat on the couch waiting for him to come home wasn't shock, it was readiness. Looking back, stopping believing his version of our story was the hardest and most liberating thing I've ever done. It meant admitting that I had spent years protecting a man who had stopped protecting me. It meant choosing myself even when it terrified me. And that choice led directly to the midnight reckoning that would change both our lives forever. That readiness I felt while waiting for Daniel to come home wasn't something that appeared overnight. It was built on weeks of quiet discoveries, pieces of evidence I never wanted to find, but once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. It started with small things that kept nagging at me. A receipt in his jacket pocket for a bottle of wine at a restaurant I'd never been to. A late-night text notification that lit up his phone while he was in the shower. Can't stop thinking about last weekend. I told myself I was imagining things. But the doubts grew louder, so I started paying closer attention, not out of suspicion at first, but out of a desperate need to protect what was left of my peace. One afternoon while Daniel was at the office, I sat at the kitchen table with our shared credit card statements. What I found made my stomach turn. Multiple charges at hotels downtown during supposed business trips. Expensive jewelry purchases from stores I'd never visited. Weekend getaways that didn't match any work calendar he had shared with me. The pattern was clear, and it had been going on longer than I wanted to admit. If you've ever discovered things that confirmed your worst fears about someone you loved, if you've ever sat alone, with proof that the person you trusted most had been building a secret life, you know how heavy that silence feels. It's not loud rage. It's a deep, aching sadness mixed with a strange kind of relief that you're finally seeing the truth. I didn't scream or call him immediately. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Marcus. My younger brother has always been the steady one in our family. When he answered, I kept my voice calm. Marcus, I think my marriage is over, and I need help getting ready. He didn't ask for details right away. He simply said, come over tonight, we'll go through everything. That evening at his place, we laid out all the documents. Marcus reviewed the house title and discovered something crucial. A large portion of the down payment and subsequent investments had come from my father's inheritance, which had been placed in a trust. Daniel had always acted like he was the sole provider, but the paperwork told a different story. Marcus helped me organize everything. Separate accounts, financial summaries, and even a preliminary consultation with a divorce attorney he trusted. I wasn't doing this to destroy Daniel. I was doing it to protect myself and Ethan. For the first time in years, I felt like I was thinking clearly, not through the fog of trying to keep our family together at all costs. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his double life without realizing I had already started detaching. He would come home smelling like Lauren's perfume, talk about how stressed work was, and then disappear into his phone. I played the part of the understanding wife because I needed time to prepare. I attended my final interview for the senior brand director position and accepted the offer quietly. I even started packing a few essential things into an overnight bag, hiding it in the guest room closet. There were moments when the pain hit hard. Late at night, I would sit on the edge of our bed and wonder how we got here. I remembered the man who once promised to build a life with me, not the one who now looked at me like I was part of the furniture. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the bench in the backyard and the blue mug. Symbols of what I had given and what had slowly been taken for granted. By the time Daniel left for that dinner with Lauren, I had already decided. I wasn't going to beg or fight for someone who had emotionally checked out long ago. I was going to let him walk out the door, and when he came back, he would find a version of our home, and a version of me, that no longer revolved around him. That midnight, as Daniel stood frozen in the doorway staring at the boxes and Marcus sitting beside me, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The evidence had done its job. It had set me free before he even knew the cage was open. He demanded answers, his voice rising. You've been spying on me, planning this behind my back. I looked at him steadily and replied, No, Daniel, I've been waking up, and it's time for you to leave. The real reckoning had only just begun. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, his expensive blazer still carrying the faint scent of Lauren's perfume. The smile he'd worn moments earlier had completely vanished. His eyes moved from the banker boxes lining the living room floor to the neatly stacked financial folders to Marcus sitting calmly beside me on the couch. "What the hell is this, Emily?" His voice started low, but quickly rose with disbelief. "You packed my things. You called your brother in the middle of the night for this?" I closed the folder on my lap and met his gaze without flinching. The woman who once would have rushed to smooth things over was gone. In her place was someone who had finally chosen herself. "This is what reality looks like when someone stops pretending everything is fine," I said quietly. "You walked out tonight, telling me you needed excitement with another woman. I decided it was time to stop protecting the illusion we've been living in." He laughed, that sharp, defensive sound I had heard so many times when he felt cornered. "One dinner, Emily. One dinner, and you're throwing away 22 years. You're being dramatic. This is crazy." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his presence steady and protective. "It's not one dinner, Daniel. We both know that." Daniel ignored my brother and stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "You've been going through my things, spying on me like some jealous housewife." I slid the printed credit card statements across the coffee table toward him. Hotel charges, jewelry, restaurants, weekend trips that never existed in our shared calendar. He stared at them for several long seconds. The color drained from his face, but he tried to recover. "So what, you've been planning this for weeks?" "Months," I corrected calmly. "Ever since I realized I was the only one still fighting for this marriage." If you've ever watched someone you loved try to rewrite history right in front of you, if you've ever seen the mask slip when they realize they're no longer in control, you understand how surreal that moment feels. I wasn't angry, I was clear. For the first time in years, my voice didn't shake. Daniel loosened his tie, pacing toward the kitchen before turning back. "The house is half mine. You can't just kick me out." That's when Marcus spoke the words that shifted everything. "Actually, the trust paperwork tells a different story. Most of the down payment and key investments came from Emily's father's inheritance. It's protected. You've benefited from it for years, but legally, this house gives her the stronger position." Daniel stopped moving. The arrogance cracked. For the first time that night, real uncertainty flashed across his face. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. The woman he had dismissed as predictable, as safe, as someone who would always be there no matter how poorly he treated her. "You talked to a lawyer already?" he asked, his voice quieter now. 6 weeks ago, I replied, right around the time I started noticing the pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture he used when deals at work fell apart. "This is insane. Lauren was it was nothing serious. I was confused. We can fix this." I almost smiled at how predictable the words sounded. "You didn't come home tonight ready to fix anything, Daniel. You came home expecting me to be waiting in the same place you left me. Invisible, accommodating, grateful." The silence that followed was heavy. Rain continued tapping against the windows. I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticking steadily, marking time we could never get back. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Ethan. I had texted him earlier, keeping the message simple. "Something important happened tonight. Call when you can." He had replied immediately, saying he was driving back from campus first thing in the morning. Daniel noticed the phone but didn't ask. He knew. Deep down, he understood that the family he took for granted was no longer orbiting around him. "I'll stay at a hotel tonight," he finally muttered, grabbing the duffel bag Marcus had quietly packed with essentials. "We'll talk when you've calmed down." I stood up slowly. "Take all the time you need. But this house, this life we built, it's no longer your safe place to return to whenever your adventures get complicated." He paused at the door, one hand on the frame, looking back at me one last time. There was anger, confusion, and something else, the first glimpse of regret. But regret wasn't enough, not anymore. The door closed behind him. Marcus placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Em." I nodded, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. The midnight reckoning wasn't loud or explosive. It was calm, precise, and it marked the beginning of me finally choosing myself. But the hardest parts, watching our son learn the truth, seeing Daniel's new life unravel, and learning to live in the quiet spaces he left behind, were still to come. The days that followed that midnight were quieter than I expected, but they carried a weight I had never felt before. Daniel left that night and didn't come back immediately. He texted once the next morning, a short message saying he was staying at a hotel downtown and that we should talk like adults when I was ready. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I made myself a cup of coffee in my blue ceramic mug and sat on the couch watching the sunrise filter through the rain-streaked windows. Ethan arrived home from college the following afternoon. The moment he walked through the door and saw the half-packed boxes still in the living room, his face tightened. I told him everything, calmly, without exaggeration. He listened without interrupting, then pulled me into a long hug. "Mom," he said softly, "I've watched you carry this family for years while Dad slowly checked out. I'm proud of you for finally choosing you." Those words healed something deep inside me. Our 20-year-old son had seen more than I realized. He helped me reorganize the house, moving Daniel's remaining things into the garage. We even spent an afternoon fixing that old wooden bench together, laughing when we remembered how crooked it had been when they first built it. For the first time in years, the house felt lighter. Not empty, lighter. If you've ever had your child witness the end of your marriage and respond with love instead of blame, you know how powerful that moment is. It reminded me that I hadn't failed as a mother. I had protected what mattered most. I started my new job the following Monday. Senior Brand Director. I walked into that downtown Chicago office building with nervous excitement. After 15 years away, I worried I would feel outdated, but the opposite happened. My years of managing a home, understanding people, and solving real-life problems gave me a perspective my younger colleagues didn't have. During my first strategy meeting, when I suggested a campaign angle rooted in emotional truth rather than flashy trends, people actually listened. For the first time in decades, I felt seen for my mind, not just for what I could provide at home. Meanwhile, Daniel dove headfirst into his new exciting life with Lauren. At first, he posted subtle hints on social media. Expensive dinners, city lights, the kind of photos that screamed reinvention. He told mutual friends he finally felt free. But freedom, I was learning, looks very different when reality sets in. About 2 weeks later, Ethan mentioned that Daniel had called him. Their conversation was short. Daniel tried to paint himself as the victim of a stagnant marriage. Ethan's response was simple. "Dad, Mom was the one holding everything together. You chose to leave, now live with it." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. I was too busy rediscovering myself. Mornings now started with coffee on the back porch, no longer rushing to make sure Daniel had everything he needed. Evenings were spent reading or planning campaigns instead of waiting up. The constant emotional labor of managing his moods had disappeared, and in its place was space. Beautiful, sometimes lonely, but honest space. There were hard nights, of course. Nights when I would stand in our once shared bedroom and feel the ache of 22 years ending. I would whisper to myself, "You didn't lose him, Emily. You released what was already gone." Those words became my anchor. Daniel's fantasy started showing cracks sooner than I expected. Lauren wanted the glamorous version of him. Spontaneous trips, constant attention, and a lifestyle his salary couldn't quietly sustain after legal conversations began. Marcus had already started the formal separation process. The house, the investments, the realities Daniel had taken for granted were now under clear legal light. One evening, as I sat reviewing campaign notes at the kitchen island, Marcus called. Daniel's lawyer reached out. They're realizing this isn't going to be the easy split he imagined. I thanked him and hung up. No victory dance. Just quiet satisfaction that the truth was finally being documented. The first weeks after he left weren't about revenge. They were about returning to myself. I was no longer the woman shrinking in the background. I was becoming the woman who had always been there. waiting for permission she no longer needed to give. But as the weeks turned into months, I would learn that Daniel's unraveling had only just begun, and my own healing was deeper than I ever imagined. The months after Daniel moved out revealed something I hadn't fully anticipated. His shiny new life with Lauren wasn't the escape he had imagined. It was simply a different set of problems wearing expensive clothes. At first, he leaned hard into the fantasy. He sent Ethan photos of rooftop dinners downtown, weekend trips, and the sleek apartment he was sharing with Lauren. In his messages to me through lawyers, he acted like a man finally living his truth. "I deserve to feel alive again," one email said. I read it once, then deleted it. I had stopped collecting his justifications. But fantasies have a short shelf life when they collide with reality. Lauren was young, vibrant, and used to a certain lifestyle. She wanted spontaneous getaways, constant nights out, and the version of Daniel that didn't come with divorce paperwork, financial negotiations, or the emotional weight of a 22-year marriage ending. Daniel, on the other hand, was discovering how expensive excitement actually was once he had to pay for it without my invisible management of our shared life. If you've ever watched someone chase a dream only to realize the dream didn't account for real life, you know how quickly the shine wears off. I didn't gloat. I simply focused on my own path while the cracks slowly appeared. One evening, Ethan came home from campus and told me about a conversation he'd had with his father. Daniel had called sounding tired, complaining that Lauren didn't understand the pressure he was under with the divorce. Ethan had replied calmly, "Dad, you left Mom because you said the marriage was boring. Now you're complaining about the new life you chose. Maybe the problem wasn't Mom." That call seemed to mark a turning point. Daniel started reaching out more, not with grand apologies yet, but with small attempts to rewrite history. "I never stopped loving you, Emily. I just needed space." I didn't engage. Instead, I threw myself deeper into my new role at work. The campaigns I led started gaining real traction. My team valued my calm, grounded perspective. The same perspective Daniel had once called too suburban. Clients responded to it. For the first time in years, I was thriving in a space that was entirely mine. Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward. Marcus kept me updated without unnecessary drama. The trust from my father's inheritance proved stronger than Daniel had ever acknowledged. The house, the investments, the financial picture, everything was being divided with clarity, not the lopsided version Daniel had assumed would protect him. I remember one cold November afternoon sitting on the newly repaired backyard bench with a warm blanket and my blue mug. The maple tree had lost most of its leaves, standing bare but strong against the gray sky. I thought about how Daniel used to sit here and talk about his big dreams while I listened and supported. Now I was the one building something new. Daniel's fantasy continued to fracture. Lauren grew impatient with the constant talks about lawyers and money. She wanted the carefree man she had fallen for, not the one drowning in consequences. One night, Ethan mentioned overhearing that they had argued loudly enough for neighbors to notice. The glamorous apartment started feeling smaller. The excitement turned into tension. I didn't celebrate their struggles. But I did allow myself a quiet acknowledgement. The man who left, because I was predictable, was now facing the unpredictability of a life built on avoidance. Through it all, I kept choosing peace. I went to therapy once a week, not to process hatred, but to understand how I had slowly disappeared and how I would never let that happen again. I reconnected with old friends. I took long walks along the lakefront on weekends. I rediscovered the woman who loved strategy meetings, creative ideas, and quiet Sunday mornings with her own thoughts. The cracks in Daniel's new life weren't my victory. They were simply the natural result of choices he had made. And with every passing week, I felt myself growing stronger in the space he left behind. The real closure, however, would come later, on a snowy afternoon in our backyard, when the past and present finally met face to face. By early winter, the legal separation had settled into a steady rhythm. Daniel and I communicated mostly through lawyers, but One Saturday afternoon, he asked to come by the house to pick up the last of his personal belongings while I was supposed to be at a work retreat. I agreed. What happened instead became one of the most important conversations we ever had. I wasn't at a retreat. Ethan and I were in the backyard, wearing thick gloves and winter jackets, repairing that old wooden bench once and for all. Snow dusted the edges of the lawn. Classic rock played softly from my phone speaker. We were laughing about how crooked it had looked the first time he and his father built it 15 years earlier. For the first time in months, the backyard felt like ours, not a museum of what used to be. Daniel walked through the side gate and stopped when he saw us. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his coat pockets, looking like a visitor in the life he once dominated. The confident man who had walked out for excitement months earlier now carried visible exhaustion in his shoulders. "Hi," I said calmly, brushing snow from my gloves. Ethan straightened up, his expression guarded but polite. "Dad." Daniel nodded toward the bench. "Still fixing that old thing, huh?" "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Some things are worth repairing properly." The three of us stood in the cold air for a moment. Then Ethan excused himself inside, leaving Daniel and me alone. The tension wasn't explosive, it was heavy with history. He looked around the backyard, at the maple tree now bare against the pale sky, at the house that had once been our shared dream. "You look different," he said quietly. "Stronger." I gave a small shrug. "I'm healing, Daniel, not because you left. Because I finally stopped waiting for you to come back to me." He exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold. I thought leaving would make everything better. That the boredom would disappear and I'd feel young again. But it didn't work out that way. I didn't interrupt, I let him speak. Lauren and it fell apart faster than I expected. She wanted the version of me that didn't exist anymore, the one without responsibilities, without consequences. Turns out I brought all my problems with me, the same ones I tried to run from. If you've ever listened to someone you once loved admit their fantasy had crumbled, you know how complicated those feelings are. There was no joy in his pain. Only a quiet understanding that some lessons come at a very high cost. I looked at the bench. "You didn't leave because our marriage was boring, Daniel. You left because facing yourself was harder than finding someone new to distract you. I spent 22 years being useful, managing the house, supporting your career, holding everything together so you could chase success. But useful isn't the same as wanted. And I finally realized I deserved to be wanted, starting with myself." He closed his eyes briefly, the snow falling gently around us. "I know I hurt you." Slowly, one small dismissal at a time, one eye roll, one late night. One comment that made you feel small so I could feel important. I didn't see it then, or maybe I didn't want to. His voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry, Emily, I really am." I studied his face. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely humbled. Not defensive, not trying to win the conversation. Just a man standing in the ruins of choices he could no longer undo. "I believe you," I said softly. "But sorry doesn't rebuild what was broken. Some doors, once closed, need to stay closed so both people can finally breathe." We stood there in silence for a while. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that comes after truth has been spoken. He helped carry a few final boxes to his car. Before he left, he turned back one last time. "I thought excitement was the answer," he admitted, "but peace was here all along. I just stopped seeing it." I nodded, and I stopped disappearing to make room for it. As his car pulled away down the snowy street, I sat on the newly repaired bench with Ethan. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. The closure wasn't dramatic fireworks or tearful reconciliation. It was quiet acceptance, the kind that allows you to move forward without carrying the weight of the past. That afternoon marked the end of one chapter and the real beginning of another. Daniel had lost the woman who had protected his peace for so long, and I had finally found the woman he almost convinced me no longer existed. The healing that followed in the coming months would prove to be deeper than either of us could have imagined. A full year has passed since that midnight when Daniel came home to a life that no longer waited for him. Spring has returned to Chicago, bringing soft rain and stubborn green pushing through the earth. And I am no longer the same woman who once stood at the kitchen counter, wondering how 22 years could dissolve so quietly. I now lead strategy meetings in a bright downtown office overlooking the river. As creative strategy director, a promotion that came faster than anyone expected, I walk into rooms where people actually listen when I speak. My perspective, shaped by years of real life, real emotions, and quiet strength, has become my greatest asset. Younger team members come to me for advice. Clients trust my instincts. The woman Daniel once called too suburban is now the one shaping national campaigns. I still drink coffee from my blue ceramic mug every morning, but now I do it on the backyard bench while watching the maple tree bloom again. Ethan visits often. We cook together, fix things around the house, and talk openly about life. He tells me he's proud of the woman I've become. Those words never get old. He eventually moved into a smaller condo closer to the city. Lauren left months ago when the reality of his life no longer matched the fantasy he sold her. Last I heard through mutual friends, he's in therapy, slowly confronting the fears he once tried to outrun: aging, validation. The arrogance of believing emotional stability was boredom. We don't speak often, but when we do, it's civil. The anger has faded into a quiet acceptance on both sides. If you've ever wondered whether the pain of leaving someone who stopped valuing you is worth it, let me tell you, from the other side it is. The peace I feel now isn't loud or flashy. It's steady. It's waking up without the weight of managing someone else's happiness. It's knowing I am no longer useful in a way that erases me. I am wanted, starting with myself. The most important lesson I learned through all of this is simple but profound: being useful is not the same as being loved. I spent decades being useful, holding the family together, supporting dreams, managing the invisible labor that kept our world spinning. But usefulness without mutual respect eventually becomes self-erasure. And when a loyal heart finally walks away, it doesn't come back the same. I no longer need Daniel to suffer for me to heal. Life has its own way of balancing the scales. He lost the woman who protected his peace for over 2 decades. I rediscovered the woman he almost convinced me no longer existed. To anyone listening who is still in the middle of their own quiet storm, the one where you're wondering if it's too late to choose yourself, hear me clearly: it is never too late. You are allowed to stop protecting people who stopped protecting your heart long ago. The version of you on the other side is stronger, clearer, and more alive than you can imagine right now. Type "I choose me" in the comments if this story touched something deep inside you. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, or if you're currently gathering the courage to reclaim your peace, know that you are not alone. Drop a heart if you believe loyal, quiet strength always finds its way back home. Thank you for sitting with me through this entire journey, for listening to the hard parts, the painful truths, and the quiet victories. Stories like this remind us that even the deepest heartbreaks can lead to the most beautiful second chapters. Until the next story, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and never forget you are worth choosing.